Cramer, and I'll just read a little bit of his bio, served more than 26 years with the INS in various law enforcement capacities, and he's offered to come down and speak to us, and I'm sure that you will find it very interesting. And so I'm going to just introduce Neville. Come on over here. And I want to first thank you all for coming, and here's Neville Cramer.
It's certainly an honor to be here, and before I go any further, I'd like to extend my deep appreciation to Mercedes for taking the time that she has to arrange this, and I am very, very grateful for her efforts. And I thank you, Mercedes, very, very much. Appreciate it. Well, as was mentioned, my background is 26 and a half years I served in the Immigration and Naturalization Service. We used to refer to it as the INS, that most of you knew about, and we used to say it stood for I'm not sure, because no one knew anything that was going on in the place for years. I've given a great many speeches in many places, and I'd like to clarify a few things before I get into the meat of the program. First of all, I'm not a racist, and I'm not xenophobic. For those of you who don't know what xenophobic means, it means a fear of foreigners. I do have one fear of foreigners, though, however. My wife is a Hungarian immigrant with a green card, and if she gets a frying pan in her hand at the wrong time, I definitely have fear of foreigners. Other than that, I'm not fearing immigration to this country. It's the lifeblood of this country. It has been for over 200 and something years, and it will continue to be if we fix our present system. Immigration reform is misunderstood by the vast majority of people in America. You've heard media pundits, university professors, the media people like O'Reilly and Hannity. Hannity gets on a Border Patrol horse and goes back to Fox News, and all of a sudden he's an expert on the border. We have people who are in the Minutemen program. They've certainly brought the media to the attention, but it sort of reminds me of a story I heard when I was a police officer. It was a very serious crash at an intersection, and people naturally stopped and saw the massive accident, and a woman got out. She was the first one there, and she ran over to the driver's side of the vehicle that was absolutely crushed, and there was a passenger inside seriously injured. And as she opens up the door and she starts to go in, this guy comes over and grabs her and pushes her aside and says, "Get out of the way, ma'am. I just finished my first aid class. I'm going to help this person." So the guy gets in there. He's about 30 seconds into trying to help this person. There's blood all over the place, and he turns around and he yells, "Somebody get a doctor." And she taps him on the shoulder and she says to him, "I am a doctor." Now, the reason I relate that story is because that's exactly what has happened with immigration reform and fixing our immigration program. The professionals, the people that have experience with this stuff and have worked on it for years, are told to step aside for the people, as I mentioned, who are dilettantes, is the best way to put it. They've looked into the issue for a year or two. Now they're an expert, whether it's Fox News, whether it's O'Reilly, whether it's the Minutemen, whatever it is, right, left, it doesn't matter. They are not experts. And a lot of them are getting into this for political reasons, and they're not allowing the experts who are professionals in this field to fix the problems. There are several different programs I'm going to discuss today, several issues. Some of them might be interesting to you, some of them might not, but this is, and they like to use the word comprehensive. This is a comprehensive problem that we have. It not only is a problem at the border, which is what obviously most of the people here are interested in, but also in the interior of the United States and around the world, because that's what's impacting our illegal immigration into this country. The few things I'm going to discuss is, first of all, the Mexican border, then interior enforcement, which is the problem that we've had with enforcing our immigration laws in the interior of the United States. Terrorism, as it relates to illegal immigration. The thing I refer to as social unacceptability, which is not something you hear most people speak about. U.S. immigration policy in Washington, D.C., and what we can do to fix the problem back there. New legislation that's being proposed. And, of course, the best part of this will be questions and answers. I find that when I talk to a group such as this, the things that you have on your mind after I finish speaking to you, the things that you have on your mind are the things that are important and that you want to get answers to. So I have plenty of time, and I look forward to answering your questions. If you just keep them to yourselves until I'm finished, I look forward to answering as many as I possibly can. A lot of times while I'm speaking today, I'm going to say the word they. You're going to hear that term, and I've been told that many times when I give speeches that I use the term and that people don't know who I'm referring to. Well, rather than make that mistake today, I'm going to tell you who they are. And I hope you keep it in mind as I give the presentation. They is the American Association of Retired Persons. It's the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and all of its affiliates around the United States. It's the National Council of Agriculture Employers, National Association of Home Builders, National Restaurant Association, American Hotel and Lodging Association, and several incorporated affiliates of religious organizations within the United States. Why do I mention who they are? It's because they are the ones that have allowed this situation to get to where it is. They are the ones that have lobbied on Capitol Hill to prevent immigration enforcement, whether it be at the border or whether it be in the interior of the United States. And they are the ones that continue to impact our immigration policies. So remember who they are as I go through this. By the way, you all look so upset already. I haven't said anything to upset you. I've even got my thing here, this Patty's Day thing. The Border Patrol. I spent a year in the border in Eagle Pass, Texas. And then after, when I went to Washington, D.C., I spent a great deal of time working with the Border Patrol. And I can tell you, not because of the patrolmen themselves, but because of Washington, D.C., and because of a lot of other sources, it is the biggest failure in American law enforcement history that we can ever hope to see. There is not a police department, a county sheriff's office, a state police department, or federal law enforcement agency that has failed in its mission as the Border Patrol has. I have nothing to say against any single Border Patrol agent, but I do have something to say about what the Border Patrol does. The reason, when I joined the Border Patrol, there were 2,000 agents and there were 2 million illegal aliens estimated in the United States. 30 years later, we have 14,000 Border Patrol agents and 15 to 20 million illegal aliens. And yet, if you ever ask the Border Patrol what they need more Border Patrol, more Border Patrol, more Border Patrol. Listen to what President Bush gave us last year, more Border Patrol. If we continue at this pace, and people say I'm crazy, we will, in the year 2030, have 50,000 Border Patrol agents and 50 million illegal aliens. Now, everybody says you're crazy. It's what's happened in the last 30 years. Who's to say that isn't going to happen in the next 30 years? So, bearing that in mind, what should we do with the border and the Border Patrol? Number one, we need fences in certain areas. We need increased uses of sensors, which are technological advances that tell us when people are moving in a particular area. Ground radar systems, developed in Scottsdale, Arizona, tried out in Yuma, Arizona, and can tell you whether it's a cow, a coyote, or a person moving in a 5-mile radius. How many ground radar systems does the Border Patrol use? 0. Stationary border guards, they don't have anybody watching the border other than the National Guard, and that to me is a mistake. But the biggest thing that the Border Patrol can advocate and use is detention. Now people are going to say, wait a minute now, we don't want to get back to Japanese internment camps where we've got camps across the United States. Well, these are not Japanese deterrent camps. This is a situation where people are crossing our international border illegally, they commit a crime, and we need to detain them. What the Border Patrol currently does and has done for the last 30 years is they pick them up, they detain them, they process them, and they kick them back across the other side. 5 hours later, they catch the same individual coming across 2 miles down the road with either the same coyote or a different coyote or by themselves. This game has continued for 30 years. Detention will work. If we detain every single person caught coming across that border for 60 to 90 days, I will tell you what it will do. 1, we won't put them back and have them come back again and again and again until they get through. That's number 1. Number 2, they won't come into the United States and get a job. And number 3, the most important, is they won't come in and get a job and start sending money back home, which is their original reason for coming here to begin with. So, if the Border Patrol wants to advocate success in controlling the border, they will advocate increased detention space for the individuals that we catch coming across that border. Now, I'm not a big fan of Joe Arpaio, the sheriff of Maricopa County, but he does do something that we should all look at very carefully. He has tent detention facilities that are identical to the tent situation that our soldiers are living in Iraq and around the world. This is not cruel and unusual punishment. If it's cruel and unusual punishment, then why are our troops living in those conditions? So, that's something that I advocate because I've spent time on the border. I've seen what one of the problems is, and I maintain that if the Border Patrol and the U.S. government would use a lot more detention, it would not only help us to control the situation here, but it would send a message down to Mexico and Central and South America that if you come across that border illegally, you are going to get detained and you are going to be held in custody for 60 to 90 days. Expensive? It may be. Worthwhile? Absolutely. We need to take a very close look at, rather than spending our money on 1,000 or 2 or 5 or 10,000 more Border Patrol agents, we might think about detention. By the way, why don't we do that now? The reason is because it will work. You might hear me say that again while I'm speaking, but bear that statement in mind. Why don't we do it? Because it will work. Let's move on. And oh, by the way, immigration has nothing to do with politics, as you all know. Governor Napolitano putting smuggling rings out of business. Fighting illegal immigration, putting smugglers behind bars. Napolitano, Goddard, and Boyer cracking down on human and drug trafficking along our border. We're standing in Sierra Vista, Arizona. What is this? This is nothing being stopped out there. Do you see any decline? Do you think that we've had any effect on the smugglers or the human traffic? Absolutely not. It's politics. Looks good, but it's not doing anything. A lot of people tell you that we must go over to Mexico and we must start shaking hands and dealing with the Mexicans because that's where the push factor is. I'm not a big fan of that. I had a great many years overseas where I worked with the State Department, and I think it's a game that they're playing. I'm not going to get into my deep sentiments about Mexico, but they have significant corruption on the other side of the border. It's very difficult for law enforcement or for our diplomatic community to deal with them because They may look you in the eye and tell you something one day, but if somebody's paid off the next day, then the idea changes. So all I'm going to tell you about Mexico, whenever you hear about the governor or the president or whatever running down to Mexico to shake hands on illegal immigration, stop helping us to solve our illegal immigration, I want you to remember one thing. The Mexican people and the Mexican government get $20 billion a year sent down to Mexico by illegal and legal immigrants living in the United States. $20 billion a year. Why, if you're getting that kind of money, would you want to stop anything? They look George Bush in the eye. They look Condoleezza Rice. Yes, absolutely. We are going to work with you to stop illegal immigration. Absolutely not. I've never seen one action to help us in that endeavor nationwide in Mexico. But why do we continue working with Mexico if that's the situation? Because they know it doesn't work. So we continue. You'll see it. Now the big thing. Interior of the United States. We're all hearing a great deal about what the legislature in Arizona is going to do. And by the way, I have to, every once in a while, kick one of these out there. But, we live in the desert. And we have rabbits and snakes and all kinds of stuff out there in the desert, our animal life. Well, there's a story about the snake and a rabbit were both blind and they bumped into each other. And one didn't know what the other one was, so they made a pact. You reach out, touch me, and tell me what I feel like, and describe it, and I'll do the same for you, and we'll know what we are. So the rabbit said, great, you go first. So the snake wrapped itself around the rabbit and said, oh my gosh, you're warm, you're furry, you got long floppy ears and a cottontail. And the rabbit said, I'm a bunny rabbit, I'm a bunny rabbit. And the snake said, my turn, my turn. So the rabbit reached out and said, oh my gosh, you're slimy, you're cold, you crawl on the ground, you got a forked tongue and beady eyes. And the snake said, I'm a lawyer, I'm a lawyer. Okay. Let's move on to interior enforcement. As much as we look at the immigration situation and you live on the border, I will tell you that what happens here impacts the United States on the interior, and what happens on the interior impacts you at the border. Why do I say that? Because if we significantly enforce our immigration laws in the interior of the United States, those people, for the most part, are not going to be coming across that border the way they are right now. It's not to say they're going to stop, but illegal immigration will be severely impacted if we can control it on the interior of the United States. So let me just give you a couple of things that I think you should be aware of. 1993 U.S. Commission on Immigration Reform, 13 years ago, almost 14 years ago. This was a commission that was put together by the President of the United States and Congress and spent millions of dollars studying the immigration issue. There are members, and I won't read you who they are, but I'll tell you right now. The leader was Barbara Jordan, a black congresswoman from Texas who was as liberal as anybody alive. And there you have on here Harold Ezell, which used to work for the Immigration Service, as right as you could possibly get. The list of members of the commission is right here. They were right and left, and they put them together, and they came up with this report. And it says, as the most fundamental method by which we can control illegal immigration, it says a computer registry to verify that a social security number is valid and has been issued to someone authorized to work in the U.S. is the most promising option for eliminating fraud and reducing discrimination while protecting individual privacy. Social security number verification, mandatory on the interior of the United States for every single employer and employee. 1993. Millions we spent on this commission. Did you ever hear about it? 1 week after it came out, the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, and the Congress said, get rid of this, quick. Get rid of it. They said get rid of it. They said we don't want it. And why did they say get rid of this report? Is because it would work. That's why we don't have it. Mandatory Social Security number verification for employees and employers in the United States, and employer sanctions where you would simply walk in just like your police officer stops you and issues you a ticket for 65 and a 35. You walk into the employer, you say, did you verify the Social Security number? Yes or no. If you did and you have proof of it, you're off the hook. If you didn't and you have employees working for you and they are illegally in the country, you're fined, period. Ticket, go see the magistrate. $1,000 every day for every person that you have employed. It would work. It's been studied. It will work. That's why we don't have it. Can we set up a Social Security number verification system in the United States? I was at the Social Security Administration in 1986 when I developed the SAVE program, and they told us we could have it up and running in 6 months. Let me ask you a question that relates to this. How many of you have used one of these? Any of you have a credit card in your pocket? Anybody in this room not have a credit card in your pocket? When you go to Walmart and try to charge a tube of toothpaste with this, do they take it at face value? Absolutely not. They swipe it. It gets verified by an independent source for a lousy tube of toothpaste. And yet, you come into this country, get a job, work in this country, live in this country, and you can walk in and give a Social Security number that doesn't even exist. You're scot-free. Social Security will write to your employer a year later and say the number doesn't exist. And what does the employer do? What does Social Security do? Nothing. Zero. Nothing. That's what they do. So you can't buy a tube of toothpaste without verifying a credit card number. I would think that in this day and age we might mandate that we verify Social Security numbers for employers. We'll see. Just so you know, when I get to the new legislation, I'll come back to it and discuss it a little bit further. But it is a proposal. But what they're proposing is that we give amnesty and a guest worker program now. Now. And how long before we set up a Social Security number verification system? In the House version, it's 3 years. In the Senate version, it's 6 years. So if they sit down and figure it out in conference, how long is it going to be? 4, 5 years before we have Social Security number? And I guarantee you that by the time that 5 years arrives, it won't be mandatory. It'll be mandatory, and then all of a sudden some congressman will put in there for companies that have over 700 employees. Okay? And everybody, oh, good idea. And that's the end of that. Okay. I'll talk about it when we get to the new legislation, and I'll be glad to answer any of your questions about it. But I was one of the ones that proposed Social Security number verification, and in September of 1990, I was transferred overnight. It's mentioned in the book, and it was probably one of the worst days of my life. So, moving on, terrorism. A lot of you sometimes like to hear someone in my position talk about what really is going on with terrorism. It's apples and oranges. When you hear about illegal immigration and you hear about people talking about terrorism, it's a scare tactic. One virtually doesn't have anything to do with the other. You say, Cramer, you're nuts. I'm nuts? Let me tell you something. The 19 terrorists that came into this country and blew up the World Trade Center never came across that border. They don't need to come across that border. I'll tell you why they don't have a need to come across that border. In August of the year, last year in August, the president did something which I want all of you to be aware of, and I'll ask you a couple of questions first. What was the country that the vast majority of terrorists were from? Saudi Arabia. Do you know what type of visas most of them had? Student visas. I'm in Sierra Vista, Arizona, and you know the answer to that question, those two questions. The President of the United States in August of 2006, with the stroke of a pen, increased the number of visas available to Saudi Arabian students to come to the United States and study from 3,000 to 15,000. It wasn't on the front page of the Post, was it? No. You talk about terrorism, you talk about a Trojan horse, ladies and gentlemen, that is an American Trojan horse. That's 15,000 students coming into this country. And what is the FBI and the ICE agents and everybody else going to do? They're going to follow them around? No. But they are probably, in amongst that 15,000, have maybe one or two terrorists. Whether they will use the border to come across into this country, it's possible. Whether they'll bring a dirty bomb into the country through the border, it's possible. But if we go back and we do what I suggested that we do at the border with ground radar systems and detention and drones and technology, it will be very difficult for them to come across that border. So, and by the way, I think that if a terrorist decided to bring something across the border, they wouldn't bring it across the Mexican border. There's too many Border Patrol agents down there. They bring it across the Canadian border. It's wide open up there. I'm sure we all realize that. Whenever you hear people talk about terrorism and illegal immigration in the same voice, I ask you to step back and say, wait a minute, these are not the same thing. And let's not deal with them the same way, because they are two completely different issues as far as I'm concerned. Another issue with terrorism, and I thought I would pass this out and give you a look at something that not very many people have seen. I was part of this in 1999, year 2000. I'm going to pass these around. I ask you that you take a look at them. It's just something that's interesting. But I'm going to explain what it is. These are two pictures: Kuala Lumpur International Airport and Bangkok, Thailand International Airport. There are three booklets I'm going to pass out. One is a miscolored U.S. passport. The other is a red Malaysian passport. And the last one is a blue book, which is empty, but in the back cover, you will find what is actually in the back of the new passports. This is the e-passport. If you apply and get a new passport now, you will receive one of these without knowing it. You can feel the chip in the back cover of this passport, but very, very lightly. I'll pass them around, let you see what they look like. And I'm going to do this for two reasons. One, it's interesting. Everybody knows that it's come out, but very few people see them. And you won't see it from the inside out because obviously you don't want to destroy your passport or anyone else's. So let me pass these around. And while they're going around, I'm going to tell you another aspect. 1999, the Malaysians developed the e-passport. I was sent over to Kuala Lumpur to buy the systems. I bought 19 of them. I put them in the United States airports. And within 2 weeks' time, our inspectors began using the readers to read the passports. And guess what was happening? PRC Chinese, using Malaysian passports, coming through Los Angeles, Honolulu, and Chicago. Photo substituted the passports were laid on the readers, and their fingerprints and their photographs did not match what was in the passport, although the picture in the passport matched the passenger. They immediately took the person to secondary. They asked them, how come this is different? And they said, it's a counterfeit passport, one right after the other. I began to get intelligence reports at my desk saying this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. This will almost prevent the misuse of passports coming into the U.S. What's the date today? 2007. 2007. 7 years later, January 1st, the first e-passport came out. The e-passport contains not only biographic information and facial information, but fingerprints. Why? Because what we want to do is we want to compare the biometrics of that person with the person who's in that passport. And the reason there are no lines at those places in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, is because they put their thumbprints on a reader. They put the passport on a reader. The reader connects the two. And the gate opens up and they walk in. They don't even talk to an immigration officer at those auto gates. So the connection is not only facial and biographic, but biometric. Guess what? The U.S. passport doesn't have fingerprints in it. It's a waste of time. It's a waste. So, why doesn't the United States capture fingerprints and put them in the passports? I haven't got a clue. I would say it's because they don't want it, but I don't even think in this case they even know what it is. But the U.S. has just failed miserably in this project so far. And it's 7 years down the line, and this is probably one of the most fundamental pieces of technology that we can use to prevent terrorism. Terrorists coming into the United States. Enough said. Just keep my books and pictures together there. Appreciate it. This is an interesting, quick addition that I like to add here. And this is an idea of mine. I've never heard it expressed by anyone else. But how many of you in this room remember getting on airplanes and being able to smoke? Do you know that there's no law about smoking inside an airplane? There's no law. You will get on a Delta flight, American flight, there's no smoking. There's no law that says you can't smoke. It's a decision made by the airline. Now, you can't light up in the bathroom because obviously the smoke alarm will go off. And you are doing something against the direct orders of the airline and against the crew. You can't do that. But as far as a law saying you can't smoke in an airplane, there's no law that says that. Why do I raise cigarettes? Well, how about DUI? When I was a police officer in Neptune Beach in 1973, we used to stop the mayor for drunk driving 2 or 3 times a week. What did we do with him? I took him home. Didn't put him in jail. Didn't blow on a breathalyzer. Took him home. It's the mayor. What happened since then? We don't have smoking on airplanes, and drunk drivers go to jail. I don't care who they are. Why? Because of a thing called social unacceptability. It is socially unacceptable to drink and drive. It is also socially unacceptable to smoke in common places in America. Yes, there are some laws, but most of what happened was based upon social unacceptability. We have got to do exactly the same thing with illegal immigration. We have got to make employing individuals who do not belong in this country and have no right to be in this country socially unacceptable. If we do that, will it succeed? Well, you tell me whether you can light up a cigarette next time you get on an airplane. That's how we change things in this country. And we saw it in the airplanes. We saw it with drunk driving. We can see it with illegal immigration. I suggest that you remember that as you talk to your politicians. Next, here's a couple of solutions to our problems back in Washington. You know, the Department of Homeland Security divided our immigration service into 3 agencies: Citizenship and Immigration Services, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and Customs and Border Protection. Now we have 3 dysfunctional agencies instead of 1. It's Washington for you. And they relegated it to the assistant secretary level. Right, now, let me ask you a couple of questions about the levels of priority in Washington, D.C. Agriculture. Do you think illegal immigrants impact agriculture? I would say so. We have a Department of Agriculture. Do you think illegal and legal immigration impact crime anywhere in the country? We have a cabinet-level Department of Justice. Health and Human Services. Does it impact health and human services? Absolutely. And I'll go down the list. Education, Department of Education. Commerce, Department of Commerce. Diplomacy, Department of State. And so on. Illegal and legal immigration impacts every single one of the things I mentioned, and every single one of them has a cabinet-level agency that has the ear of the president every single day. And what do they relegate immigration to? The assistant secretary level. 3 dysfunctional agencies in the Department of Homeland Security. That's what the politicians think about immigration and fixing our immigration issues. If we want to fix immigration, the first thing we should do is establish a Department of Immigration in Washington, D.C., and get the ear of the president and the power of a cabinet-level position and get this thing fixed instead of relegating it down to some third-rate level as they have. How about a fellow by the name of Greenspan or a fellow by the name of Bernanke? Anybody remember him? Greenspan has been out of office now for a year. The guy opens his mouth the other day and the stock market tanks 240 points. The guy's not even in office. That is because he was the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Why do we have a Federal Reserve? I'll tell you why. One of the reasons is because somewhere along the line, the government realized that when it comes to our monetary policy in this country, we cannot have politicians in Congress or in the White House messing with our monetary policy. So they created an independent Federal Reserve Board to deal with these very difficult, nonpartisan issues that must be dealt with, and they must be dealt with in a nonpartisan way. What do we need? We need an immigration policy board. We need an immigration policy board so that when the 127,000 Cubans get dumped on our shores, as they did in the Mariel boat lift, we need a policy board to say 105 of those 127,000 can stay, and the rest of them are going to be taken back on a boat, offloaded at Guantanamo Bay, and put out through the fence because they're crazy, they're criminals, they're murderers, and they're the dregs of the Cuban society that Castro dumped on us. Instead, no way. The politics of South Florida got involved. The politics of the Democrats got involved, and the Republicans, and the president, and all the rest. And the next thing we know, to this day, we spend millions of dollars detaining thousands of those Cubans because you can't let them out in society. They've already proven that a half dozen times. Stealing ambulances at scenes of traffic accidents and running over people, raping nuns in Washington, D.C. I mean, these are really quality individuals. Okay, we've kept them here in the United States, and in 1980, we should have put them back on a boat and sent them to Cuba where they came from. A national immigration policy board would have done that because they would never have had to deal with the politics of Congress and the White House. We need to get this out of partisan politics and into a reasonable, start getting some reasonable solutions and policies to this problem. Lastly, new legislation. I understand as of yesterday that in 2 weeks or thereabouts, we will be getting an immigration bill by Senator Kennedy. He will be the author. And in this particular case, we will see 100 parts of amnesty and guest worker and 1 part of enforcement. Senator McCain is beginning to softly back away, as I understand it, from supporting the entire bill because Senator Kennedy has now taken out the enforcement mechanisms and he has made certain that there will be amnesty and there will be a guest worker program that is primary to solving our immigration problems, and enforcement will take a back seat. But 2 points. Do you think there's more Border Patrol agents in the bill? Absolutely. Sure. Why? Doesn't work. Do you think there will be Social Security number verification system? Not for 5 or 6 years. Why? Because it will work. So that's where we're headed. It's certainly been a pleasure being here today and talking with you. I do want to tell one last quick thing about the father that goes to he's very curious about his son and wants to know whether the son is going to grow up to be a minister like he is. So he goes to the boy's bedroom and he puts a silver dollar on the desk and a Bible and a bottle of whiskey. And he hides in the closet and says, I'm going to watch this kid. If he picks up that Bible and begins to read it, he's going to follow in his father's footsteps. If he picks up that dollar, he's going to be a good businessman. And if he picks up that whiskey, he's going to be a drunk, a no good drunk. until he gets in the closet. He waits. The boy walks in. First thing the boy does, picks up the Bible. Father's all happy, sitting in the closet. Kid takes the Bible, puts it under his arm, takes the silver dollar, puts it in his pocket, opens up the bottle of whiskey and takes a huge gulp. The father goes, "It's going to be a congressman." What I mentioned was the American Association of Retired Persons. That is the AARP.
Okay, gotcha. That's clear.
And I'll explain very briefly what they were part of. In 1990, when I was a vociferous proponent of Social Security number verification for employers, they came out, as well as several other groups that I mentioned, went to their congressional representatives and said, not only are we not going to have Social Security number verification, but the guy in headquarters at INS that's proposing it needs to understand that we want to see him moved. And I was moved. I was moved to become the chief of the training academy overnight. That's a matter of fact. It's in the book. I have the documentation to show what happened. And as I mentioned earlier, it was one of the saddest days of my life. And why did the AARP not want Social Security number verification? It's quite simple. It's because the illegal immigrants in this country supposedly dump billions of unaccounted for dollars into the trust fund of Social Security. And the AARP does not want that money interrupted. They want those billions sent into the trust fund to keep it solvent. So any attempt to stop illegal immigration will be an attempt to cut back on those billions going into the trust fund. And their interest is to make certain that that trust fund stays solvent, even though it is in total support of illegal immigration. I spoke with their representatives. They were quite blunt behind closed doors and said, we will block any attempt to reduce the amount of money that's going into the trust fund. Now, here's a part that AARP doesn't seem to have any trouble with. There are 55 people around the world that are Social Security representatives in our embassies. So if no one is taking money out of the Social Security system who's an illegal alien, why do we have 55 people working overseas on Social Security issues? The fact of the matter is, if you work in this country for 10 years and you get your 40 quarters, doesn't matter if you're legally or illegally here, you get your entitlement. You get it. So this concept that all of these poor people are working from Mexico and putting money into Social Security and they never get anything out of it is a bold-faced, outright lie to the American public. They do get it, they can apply for it, and they get it upon asking if they meet the qualifications of having worked for 40 quarters, period. It's a fallacy to say that these people don't collect their entitlement. They do collect their entitlement. I guarantee you, not every one of them, but a significant number that will impact our Social Security. Well, if that's not the truth, then why do we have offices of Social Security in Manila and the Philippines? Why do we have them in Mexico City? I mean, we have all those people that are going down there that need Social Security advice in the embassy in Mexico City? No, I don't think so. I think that's part of it, but the other part of it is because they're accepting applications for benefits for which they worked here. They know what numbers they used. I saw one coming in today. You know, I have to plead ignorance. I don't know. I do know that I'm not in favor of the drones, because I think for the money they're spending on the drones, it's very expensive. I'm a big proponent of satellite technology. I sat in an office in Washington, D.C. For security reasons. I can't tell you where or what, but I sat there and watched them direct a satellite on a car in a parking lot and read the license plate. So, I don't know. That's pretty good technology there. As far as customs is concerned and drugs, you'll notice I didn't talk about it. And the reason is because I'm not the first aid guy at the intersection. Okay? I'm the doctor. My specialty is immigration. I don't know anything about drugs, and I don't know anything about customs. So let them deal with the issues that you have with that. But this is about illegal immigration. I am not a proponent whatsoever of local law enforcement getting involved in the immigration issue. Okay? I'm not. If they're properly trained, I want them to be what we call a force multiplier for immigration. When immigration has an operation to do, or the Border Patrol has an operation, the police officers that are trained in immigration, let them assist the Border Patrol. But to have police officers out there enforcing immigration laws, I'm dead against it. I've been a police officer, and I've been an immigration agent, and I've been a Border Patrol agent. It's a nightmare. Because one of the things that you have to understand is that the Immigration Service is in a state of collapse. They're in a state of collapse. I'm just going to show you, and I'll tell you why I get so wound up over this, is everybody's saying that they want the police to do immigration work. Immigration agency lost track, 111,000 files. This is November of last year. Okay, one of the people who they lost track of was a suspected terrorist, and they naturalized him as a U.S. citizen. The reason I raise this is if you're a police officer on the street and you stop somebody and you think they're an illegal alien and you call the Law Enforcement Support Center or the U.S. Border Patrol and say, I've got so-and-so and this is where he's born and this is what he says. Oh yeah, he's an illegal alien. Okay, you're under arrest. They put him in the back of the car and they take him down, they've detained him, they've taken away his liberties under the Constitution of the United States. Oh, wait a minute, whoa. 5 days later, they found his file. It just so happens he's legal. But for 5 days, he sat in the can. Okay, and now the city of Sierra Vista or the county of Cochise is going to end up paying him $10 million for depriving him of his constitutional liberties because it was an unlawful arrest. So, let immigration do immigration work, because this is what they have to deal with, and not the local police. However, I believe that that is a cop-out as far as saying we don't have the detention space to hold these people. Build the detention space. We've had this problem ongoing for 30 years. Let's realize what it is. Let's put up the facilities. Let's detain these people. The most interesting thing is that Chertoff is a judge, and I guess he's qualified as far as the law is concerned. And by the way, the President of the United States has the right to make political appointments at that level. I have no problem with Chertoff. But I do have a little bit of a problem with Julie Myers. And Julie Myers is the head of ICE. Julie Myers' 3 qualifications listed in the Washington Post was 1, she worked at the White House. 2, she's the niece of a general in the United States Air Force. And 3, the best qualification is that she's married to Mr. Chertoff's chief of staff. Those are the 3 qualifications that were given to her to run the Immigration and Customs Enforcement agency, one of the most important agencies in the federal law enforcement system. And those are her qualifications. I don't know about Chertoff, but if you look throughout the Immigration Service, and they've listed them in my book, and they're very upset about it, is that they're down at the operational level. People at the level of like a chief of police or a lieutenant or a sergeant were political appointees. People with badges and credentials that could arrest people, carrying guns. Not a single day of academy. Not a single day of training ever given to them. And we had that rampant throughout the INS. In fact, I put in the book that if the state or local police agencies did the same thing that immigration did, the chiefs and some of the state officials would have been arrested by the U.S. Department of Justice. And under what agency was the Immigration Service where this was going on? The U.S. Department of Justice. And I named the names. And for those of you who don't think that there's consequences to pay for naming names, 2 weeks after I sent the book to be cataloged at the Congress and to the Justice Department to be reviewed because I had a clearance and I had to submit it. 2 weeks later, I was denied boarding on an aircraft as a security threat to the United States of America. I was declared a security threat and refused to fly out of Sky Harbor Airport, going to Merida, Mexico to present the e-passport to the International Civil Aeronautics Organization. That's a fact. So, you pay your consequences, but I'm here, so that's good. One thing that we cannot do is you cannot detain somebody and force them into labor. That's just something we can't do in this country. If we want to say to them, your sentence is 120 days for crossing the border illegally and you can get out in 90 days and cut it short by 30 before you're deported by getting into a cleanup crew, fantastic. We can do that all we want, okay? But to say to the individuals that are sitting there in detention, whether it's in a jail, a county jail, a federal penitentiary, or wherever it is, you must do this. And you must go out there and work in the sun and pick up the trash. No, we cannot do that. That is unconstitutional, and we just can't do that. What I advocate and what I've suggested, that garbage would never be there. They wouldn't even come across the border. And it wouldn't take very long before the word went down there to Mexico. Don't do it. Don't cross that border. Not because it's dangerous. Not because you're going to die in the hot sun. Not because the reason is because when you get there, there's going to be nothing to do there. Because every time you walk into an employer with your counterfeit green card and your counterfeit social security number, they're going to say, I'm sorry. I verified your document with with immigration and it doesn't exist. Your social security number belongs to a 2-year-old. Okay, get out of here. Immigration agents show up here. I'm going to pay $1,000 for every day you're employed. Get out of here. It's not rocket science. And it will work. But they don't do it for that reason. Because it will work. Well, you're looking at the guy who developed what was known as the SAVE system. That came right out of this little head. A systematic alien verification for entitlements. If you look at the history of it, you'll see that I was the fellow that developed it and put it in place. The SAVE system is what's now being used as the basic pilot, which is exactly what you're referring to. It's a voluntary program that allows employers who want to check the documents of their employees to go to the Department of Homeland Security and verify that the cards are valid. But, you're right. What idiot that's got 150 illegal aliens working for him signs up for that program? I mean, they just don't do it. Oh, yeah, sure. The guy's got, 200 American workers. I want to participate because I'm a good American. Of course you want to participate. You're a good American because they're not going to find anything. But how many construction, MB Homes or the construction people or the people up in the Napa Valley or Washington, D.C. I think I'm not sure what page it's on, but in my book, there's a picture that was taken in front of the Capitol of the United States. We arrested, I think it was 14 illegal aliens. I took the picture. Or they took the picture of me. I'm not sure we moved the camera, but it's in front of the Capitol of the United States paving Pennsylvania Avenue. And the Capitol is right there behind them. Now, is that guy going to sign up? Heck no, he's not going to sign up. And I went to the mayor of Washington, D.C. At the time, it was Mayor Barry. No comment, Mayor Barry.
Did you bring your stuff with you?
Yeah. Oh, boy, those were the times. Huh? And I went to him and I said, look, this is a city contract. It's paving Pennsylvania Avenue. Don't you think that there's black youth that would like those jobs at $14 an hour? No. You're a racist. Get out of here. That's all. This whole office told me you're a racist. We don't want to have any part of that. Don't arrest anybody. Go back to your office and, do what the genie said. You know about the genie, right? You have an ICE agent, brand new, gets transferred to Washington, D.C. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, he gets to his desk and sits down. It's a beautiful desk, everything. He's got a nice little lamp sitting there. It's a little dusty, so he wipes it off. The genie comes out. The genie says, you got 3 wishes. You set me free after 1,000 years. You kept it. He says, great. First thing I want is Diet Coke. So Diet Coke comes up on the desk. Says, oh, second wish. I want to be sent to the most magnificent resort in the world and surrounded by beautiful women. Boom, goes down. It's a magnificent resort in the Bahamas, magnificent women surrounding him. Genie's standing there and says, what do you want next? He says, last thing I want is, he says, I don't want to have to do anything for the rest of my life. The genie sends him back to his desk. It's not so much the money, it's what they do with the money. That's the trouble with immigration. You see, now they have a fee structure. You pay a fee when you enter on the aircraft through Customs and Border Protection, and you pay a fee, and they're outrageous. I mean, my wife applied to get her green card replaced, and it was $290. Now, this is nothing more than a sophisticated driver's license, okay? And they send you, this is great, they send you a notice that they've received your check and that you're going to get another notice. These fees that they're taking in are just, they're incredible. They're billions of dollars. And yet, there's another example in the book where a friend of ours filed an application, a U.S. citizen wife from Michigan, applying for her golfer husband, who's from Australia. They sent her a notice and said it'll be 990 days before we adjudicate your application. It's in the book. 990 days before your husband can come to the States. That's great. I took it to immigration and I said, well, are you guys kidding me? Is this real? Never got an answer. You don't remember, but our offices were on the 5th, 6th, 8th. On the first level and of the building was the boardroom. It was a topless bar. When I got there from the border, I came from Chicago, but previous to that, Eagle Pass, Texas. I'm, Washington, D.C. I had never been there in my life. I'm driving down the road, and there's the FBI and the J. Edgar Hoover building and the Department of Justice. And I get to immigration. What is it? I get the boardroom is the first thing I walk into. I knew from that day, I think I had made a mistake. In the last 25 years, I would never have had an opportunity to come and talk to a group like you or any of the other groups that I speak to, because immigration was such an issue that nobody wanted to talk about. But what's happened is, and this is where I do give the Minutemen a bit of credit, is that they have raised the level of concern about the issue across the country. And people are beginning to get concerned about it, and people are beginning to voice their dissent against this continuous influx of people. And things in this country and democracy never work quickly. It's just something you study when you study political science and you study our democracy. Nothing happens quickly. And I think right now that with people such as yourselves and some of the things that I mentioned and some of the people on Capitol Hill, that within the next, say, decade, we will begin to make some inroads into this problem. But it will take us 10 years. Amnesty is an interesting thing. I mean, what is amnesty going to do? It's just going to make the problem go away for 10 years. Just go away. It's like legalizing cocaine. If you legalize cocaine, there's no more cocaine problem, right? Well, that's what they're going to do with the illegals. And I would like to interject something very important. I'm glad you asked the question. Remember, I worked on the Immigration Reform and Control Act legislation, which was the amnesty and employer sanctions in 1986. The law means nothing. The law doesn't mean anything as far as immigration is concerned. It's the implementation of that law. It's the regulations. Because what happened with employer sanctions in 1986 and 87 is it was sabotaged by the people at INS under orders from people outside of INS. Sabotage it. Make certain that anybody that knows anything about immigration enforcement is taken out of the program. And if you look at the history of employer sanctions, you will see it was run by who? Jack Shaw, ex-FBI, Clarence Koster, ex-Health and Human Services, several other people I mentioned in the book. Not a single immigration officer was ever involved in the implementation of that program and writing those regulations. That was sabotage. It was dead on arrival. That's why it doesn't work. You can hear all you want to hear from all the people that say, oh, big business doesn't want. Let me tell you something. When Ronald Reagan was president and that law was passed, we had that law right in our hands, employer sanctions. Let's go out there and do it right. Build the system. Give employers the right to verify Social Security. Build it the way it should be built. And every single time any of us went there and tried to do what we had to do, out the door. That's documented. Time and time and time again. I could have a line of immigration officers stand here and tell you exactly what happened to them. Public doesn't know that. So the point is this. Whatever law they pass, it's not the law. It's the implementation of that law that we have to watch very carefully. This interior program where we fly them into the interior of Mexico, and in some cases we flew them down to Guatemala, and the criminal aliens have been taken back to Guatemala and San Salvador. I think if you simply detain them for 60 or 90 days, I think if you put them back across the other side of the border, you will so disrupt their lives and wanting to come here that they're not going to try again. But remember that I'm not saying that you're going to detain them for 60 or 90 days and that's the answer to the problem. You also have to have interior enforcement. I want it so that when they're sitting in that small village in Mexico or in a foreign country, whether it's Central or South America or overseas, and they get word from their friends that came to the United States that they couldn't cross the border illegally, and when they did, they got detained for 90 days, and when they got put back across the border and they finally made it through, after the coyote brought them in and got them to Chicago, they couldn't get a job. They just had to go home. That's it. There's nothing racist about that. There's nothing difficult about that. That's the way it should work. So it doesn't matter whether you put them back across the other side or you ship them into the interior. Let's put the programs in place that we know will work to prevent them from coming here to begin with. I define it very clearly. Everybody says we don't want to use the term illegal alien. Well, let me tell you something. The law, the Immigration and Nationality Act distinctly says you're either an alien or a citizen. It says that either that or you're dead in a box, okay? But in this country, you're an alien or a citizen. If you're an alien, you fall into one of two categories. You either have the right to be here and you're legally here under whether it's an immigrant or a non-immigrant, or whether you're a student or a diplomat or a green card holder, whatever it is, or you don't have the right to be here. Why? Because you've broken the law. And if you've broken the law, it's illegal. So illegal alien. We all, I think, all agree on that. I must tell you that I have a lot of respect for some politicians, not very many, you can probably count them on one hand. But some of the politicians are okay, but they get into Washington, D.C., and there is an atmosphere of corruption in Washington, D.C., and I use the word broadly. To me, as a special agent, if you go out and do somebody a favor, or you're paid by somebody with a brown envelope under the table, and it's got $20,000 in cash in it, and you do that person a favor based on that envelope, that's corruption. It's against the law. But if you're a congressman, okay, and somebody hands you the $20,000 in an envelope on top of the table, okay, and they call it a campaign contribution, and you put it in your pocket, and you go out and you pay off your friends with it, and you get legislation passed based on that $20,000, it's corruption. It's as corrupt as me taking the money under the table. And unfortunately, our politicians will tell you, it takes me money to get elected. It takes me money to run for office. And the people who give me the money to run for office are the people who I respond to. And that does not include probably very many people in this room. But it does include Accenture, General Motors, Microsoft, et cetera, et cetera. It's corporate America. They're the ones who pay for the $100,000 a half-minute advertisements when you're running for president, Congress, and the Senate. That's who pays for it. And when you take that money over the top of the table, you pay it back. That's all there is to it. And all of this stuff with Julie Myers and the ICE, and they're going to go out and take these pallet people and arrest them. They've arrested 4,000 aliens in the last 6 or 8 months. And everybody says it's sending a chill across America that they've arrested 4,000. 4,000? There's 14 million. 4,000? That's a joke. How many of you have ever had a job and paid withholding tax? Every single one of us. You know why? Because Roosevelt could not get the money for World War II. So for those of the people who were alive, remember that Roosevelt came out and established withholding tax so that they would take a little bit of tax out of your check, and then at the end of the year, if the government owed you any, they would send it back. And if you owed the government some, then you would have to pay it. But during the year, they were going to collect your taxes. Okay? Pay as you go. So instead of submitting your Social Security number to FICA a year or 6 months or 90 days after you get your job, submit it to FICA 20 minutes after you get your job. 20 minutes. And let them come back with automation and say that Social Security number is good or not good. That's the mandatory system we need. And it's identical to withholding tax. Do it now. Because if you don't mandate it and you don't do it now, it won't get done. That's what Roosevelt taught us. Accenture, which is a company based in Bermuda, the one that held a golf tournament for Tiger Woods a few weeks ago. I think they're based in Bermuda to skip paying taxes. But Accenture won the $1.8 billion contract called U.S. Visit, and they're supposed to fingerprint everybody coming in and fingerprint everybody going out, so we know who's coming in and who left. Well, a few weeks ago they came out and said, guess what? We can only do it in the airports. We can't do it on the land border ports because it's too expensive. Okay? And another little problem. We know who came in. We don't know whether they left or not. But we don't know anything about where they are or what they're doing or who they are or anything else about them in the United States. We don't have any money to pay for that program. So once you get in, you give the government your fingerprints, you have your little I-94, home free. If you don't leave on time, don't you think that the system would be built to go and hire ICE agents to go out and say, hey, you said you're coming in, you're staying at the Marriott Hotel, you're here for 90 days, it's 2.5 years, how about getting out? Okay? No, there's no money for that. There's no money for anything like that. The soldiers are over there in Iraq, and they're working next to a contractor, like myself, because I've been offered this job 50 times. MPRI is a company in Alexandria, Virginia. They're responsible for recruiting people to go over and train Iraqi border patrol. What do you think they offer a month? $14,500 plus $11 per diem. Doesn't take you long to figure out that's somewhere around $160,000 a year. $160,000 a year to go over and train the Iraqi border patrol agents. What do you think the Marines over there are getting paid? 160 grand a year? Their wives and kids are on food stamps back here. Why? Because we're paying the private sector to go out there and do something that the government should be doing. But there's your answer. And I have nothing against MPRI. They're a wonderful company. They're doing a great job. But the fact of the matter is that when it comes down to whether it's domestic or overseas, we pay a lot of contractors to do something that we don't want the government to do. Let me add this. I held this up earlier. 111,000 lost files. Citizenship and Immigration Services. They handle maybe 700,000 immigrants a year. I want to ask you a question. Who is going to process 14 million illegal guest workers?